First of all, I think your analysis was very straight line. History doesn't run in a straight line.
Kid, you cannot tell your neighbor he is stealing ducks when you are stealing funds.
As High Commissioner, I was wrong. As Charandas Prasad, I reacted naturally how any person would have.
I did not come here for that kind of abuse. I did not come here for that kind of abuse. If you're going to go down that road, I'll walk off.
But it's all okay once they're talking. If they were talking, I could not have been here today.
You got ADHD. I got that.
Calm down.
I think I've done enough in terms of taking our team out of trouble from losing.
Come on, Lou, Taylor. That's good. I'm reading the script now, and the first person that comes to my mind to play a detective,
Yes,
but
the
an
kind of
erratic
Mikhail
detective
Rodriguez.
is Mikhail Rodriguez.
Why an African slap an Indian? Why a man and slap a woman? Look, girl, how you deal with that? You deal with that.
We must encourage platforms like this because it brings together different people and allows for discussions to take place in our country on a multiplicity of fundamental issues.
Kingdom, you apologizing for something you think I did is wrong. I don't want you to do that, and you should not have done that. Hi, good evening. Pleasant Mashramani night to you. Happy and enjoyable Mashramani. We're coming to you Monday evening, so we hope you enjoyed Mashramani yesterday, Sunday. We hope you enjoyed it today and you will enjoy it the rest of the evening. Mashramani is one of the important calendar dates in Guyana's calendar, and we're here this evening to extract the thoughts of someone on the evolution of Guyana. When you are 94 years of age, you left Queen's College at 1950, and you have been involved in Guyana from 1950. Then you would have seen the evolution of Guyana in colonial times, the era of independence, and right up to the establishment of republicanism, of which Mashramani is a central motive in republicanism. So this evening we will ask someone who has spent 94 years of his life in Guyana to tell us about what was Guyana like from the time when he worked in colonial days, when he worked after independence, and he saw the evolution of republicanism. When you are at that age and have worked in your country for so long, it means you have interfaced with the who and who in Guyana. And in fact, he has interfaced with the who and who in Guyana. On this Mashramani evening, we bring to you one of the most experienced Guyanese alive today, Mr. Earl John, who helped to shape the administrative function of the sugar industry and the administrative function of the CARICOM Secretariat, two important institutions in the biology of Guyana. Sharing tonight with me the program, of course, is Leonard Craig. And so we will now introduce to you this stalwart of Guyanese existence, Mr. Earl John. Mr. Earl John, thanks so much for granting this interview. Young Leonard Craig. So we have three different generations here.
It's a pleasure, indeed. Well, it's funny, you know, because I reflect on the passing of time. I've written about it, and I still feel there's more to write about. If you don't mind my hop, skipping, and jumping, right now I'm engaged in interpreting the 2025 budget. And I find so much to be able to extricate from that, to tell people what is happening in Guyana now. But to go back to British Guyana, one of the funny things I recall about British Guyana is when I was being interviewed by the British Guyana government at the time to be a member of the civil service. All the doctors at the time were foreigners. And I remember this doctor, this white man in the public hospital. You couldn't get into the civil service unless you were medically certified. And he said to me, he said, "What's your name?" And I told him my name. He said, "Age." I told him my name. He said, "Do you smoke?" I said, "No." He said, "Do you drink?" I said, "Yes." He said, "What do you drink?" I said, "Rum." He said, "What brand?" And I said, "Polar beer." He said, "Polar beer? I drink polar beer. You pass, you pass."
So you passed.
I passed.
Rum helped you to get into the civil service.
So I remarked the tremendous contradiction now in doing the budget, the 2025, and I've done budget for the last 20 years from a human resource perspective, that civil servants are not now, or public servants are not now medically examined fit for work. It's a remarkable thing. And when I look, more importantly, that there was an annual performance evaluation for public servants, as they were for even, I think, more demanding than the private sector at that time. There's nothing like that at all. And I keep wondering, when I look at the organization structure of today's public service, that there's no mention made of evaluation and promotion. That doesn't come out, and they argue about it. I'm sorry if I'm...
No, you go ahead. You talk.
I'm sorry.
You discuss what you want to discuss.
I'm not answering your question as directly.
But let me stop to inform our viewers that we're inside your home. We're on Sachi Bazar Street in Pashad Nagar, in the home of our guest, Mr. Orjan. As you can see, the backdrop, some of his voluminous publications. If you spent over 70 years in Guyana in different positions, interfacing with all kinds of authorities and people, then obviously you have to produce a lot of work. This is some of his works here. Just let me read for you from one of Mr. John's book, Being Personal with Sugar. And so I will ask him to continue and then invite Leonard, but just let me read this for you. John's 20 years in the sugar industry of Guyana, initially with the Booker's Sugar Estate, spanned from 1958 to 1978. 2 years after the industry was nationalized, leaving at the invitation of the General Secretary of the Caribbean Community Secretariat, Dr. Curly King, to establish the Secretariat's first personnel management desk. On retirement from the CARICOM Secretariat in 1991, at age 60, he was invited back by Booker Tate of the United Kingdom to join their management team. They had been contracted by the Guyana government to revive the failing fortunes of the sugar industry. He stayed until 1995 as Human Resource Director. In other words, this is Mr. Sugar. Continue and then Leonard.
Well, I won't boast about being a sweet man, but
you wouldn't boast of being a sweet man, but you were a sweet man. I saw some of your photograph here. It only said you were very good looking. So you had some sweet manism about you when you're in your 20s and 30s, right?
well, at that
I have a very good photograph of you being more handsome than Denzel Washington.
well,
Look at Earl John here. Look at Earl John here, the top photograph.
well, you anticipated
This
in a way.
isn't he Nigel Denzel Washington could compare to this man.
No,
that's
but
a good photo indeed.
Yeah, but you anticipated me because I couldn't ever go through this exercise without talking about a lifelong friend, Naurang Prasad. Who? Naurang Prasad.
Oh, yeah, he
His
died a few years
photograph
ago.
was there.
Yeah.
When I went to Blemont, with my first induction into the sugar industry on an estate, I discovered this. I was still a cadet at Blemont Estate. And for some reason, Booker Tate picked on me and sent me Naurang Prasad, who had come from Blemont himself, for me to train him when I was still in a learning state. And Naurang and I have remained close for the rest of our lives.
Until he died. Leonard?
Even though he went to the United Nations and went all over the world, but once he traveled to Guyana, whatever time of day or night it was, he came in search of me. I have a copy of his book here that he's written, and he's mentioned me there. And I have one that deals with him and me when he was representing the United Nations in Colombia. And it's a tremendous relationship. But as I speak of Blemont, I must tell you at my first estate, my experience there. I only met Scotsmen, Dutchmen, and Englishmen. And therefore I wasn't welcome as the only local senior department head, at that time just called an assistant personnel manager.
Would you say they snubbed you?
They didn't know how to deal with the locals. All the locals they had were junior staff. And so that fortunately, Booker's had a very creative idea, because Sir Jock Campbell, who was then head of Booker's, had spent in his teenage days 2 years at Port Moran. And what he saw there, including Teddy Jagan's father, he didn't like. And he said as a teenager, when he saw the conditions of workers, that if ever he became head of Booker's, he would change it, because people were more important than shops and ships and sugar estates. It turned out when he became chairman, and sorry if I might sound like but at a point in time when he would come to Guyana every 2 years. And then when he visited Blemont the first time I was there, and he asked the other managers what they were doing. And then he said, John, tell me about human relations on the estate. And I told him the MPCA, the Sugar Estates Clerk Association, the Guyana Headsmen Union, the Sugar Estate Boilers Association. And when he listened to me patiently, he said, John, I didn't ask you about industrial relations, I asked you about human relations. That's a lesson I learned. But I learned other lessons at Bremen.
Okay, let me see. Let me hear
right,
what Leonard Craig has to you.
You-
Young Craig, you
you-
wasn't even born when you were a
Not-
sweet man.
Not even my father.
Sweet
when
man, I'm
you-
talking about sugar, Mr. Johnson.
When you entered the civil service, as they called it at that time, we prefer the term public service these days. But when you entered the civil service, what was your entry point? Where did you first work?
The public works department.
Public works. Okay, and it was in personnel, or was it your general
Just a
staff?
clerk.
Just a clerk.
Clerk 2.
Okay, and to be a clerk too, you had to undergo a medical exam.
Anybody
Anybody.
entering the civil service had to be medically examined. That was a standard.
That was a standard thing, even though you were young and sprightly and all of that. It doesn't matter.
Even
Oh.
though I was an international athlete representing Guyana while at Queen's College, and even after I left Queen's, I still run.
You were a speedster or long distance?
Mr. John,
I was a sprinter.
I want to interrupt both of you. Mr. John, I've been doing these interviews for decades now, and when you look, time flies, and you don't get in something that you wanted.
Yeah.
I want, before we go into independence, even how we come up to Mashumani, you told me there were 5 West Indian test stars that lived a block away from each other. Could you explain that to our viewers?
Well, you know where the DCC cricket
Yes, yes, we all know that.
That was New Garden Street
Yeah.
and Crown Street.
Still there, still comes.
And Ornock Street. So
Yeah.
it was Ornock and Crown. At Crown at that time was called Queenstown Pasture, where there's a big
Field.
school there now, college now. And from when you leave Ornock Street, the first lot was the Gibbses, and that was landscapes.
That's good, yeah.
When you move the next lot was Clive Lloyd.
That's 2.
And I think you bypass 2 lots, and when you get to the corner was Roger Harper.
Roger Harper.
That's 3.
There were 4 actually. So, and when he was at the corner of New Garden Street, and as you look across, diagonally was Robert Christian.
So 4 West Indian and Guyanese test stars lived about 4 blocks from each.
And
That's very unique.
And that's actually less than 4 blocks.
I
That's 2
called my
blocks.
piece a crown of cricketers. Because there's nowhere in the world you could find
4 in about 2 blocks.
Yeah.
I want the viewers to hear that, because when Mr. John told me this when we were arranging this interview, I said I have to ask that question.
And actually, one of those streets were renamed
Landscape
after
Street.
landscapes, yes. And I think one should be renamed after
Harper?
Harper, yeah. Because, I mean,
You already have Clive Lloyd Drive.
who knows who's
Landscape
or not?
Street goes in is Hammond Street.
Right. Used to be Almond Street.
Almond Street, yeah.
But as you're talking about cricketers, I feel more directly responsible
For Frederick.
for one of the great West Indian cricketers,
Oh yeah, you discovered Roy
which I
Frederick.
found while I was at Vermont, Roy Frederick.
Yeah, he's a Barbician, yeah.
And he was at Ithaca, just miles down the Beast River from Blairmont Estate. And when I went to Blairmont, and since what you call it, the community centers and girls clubs were in a generation at that time. And I, having played for Queen's College, first class cricket, I joined the team in Vermont as I thought that, not the team, but the club. I thought that as part of my personnel function, if I mixed with the guys, it turned out that the captain of the side was a wicketkeeper. And when I met him at the club, I said, but you know, I am an opening bowler. That's what I used to do. And then, because he was just a worker in the factory, he said, Mr. John, we want to make you captain of the side. I said, well, we used to play first division in the East. But there, in that team, I just found Roy Fredericks. And I could not understand when I saw him play where he learned to bat like that. If you saw the strokes he played. And I said, but I've seen so much intercolonial cricket as we had in those days. Roy has never seen another cricket match in his life but what he played in the East. And after time, I became part of the team. But it turned out that Clyde Walker was invited by Bookers to come and develop sports in the sugar industry. And I called Clyde up one day. We were at equals at the time. And I said, please, Clyde, you have to, they had trial matches at the time. I said, please, you have to invite Roy Fredericks. And he said, Leonard, but the man hasn't played a first-class match in his life. He even played for Bobis yet. I said, Clyde, please, you have nothing to lose. I'll pay all the expenses. And Clyde conceded, and I paid the expenses. It turned out Roy Fredericks didn't know where Georgetown was. Yeah, and of course he knew less about Georgetown Cricket Club ground, where to find it. But you know what happened? You arrived, first trial match, 100 runs. So there was no choice. Second trial match, 100 runs. And I didn't have to argue his case again.
But I guess our viewers, the millions of fans around the world of West Indian cricket who didn't know would know that the man who's sitting right there discovered one of the great left-hand batsmen in the history of Test cricket, Guyanese Roy Fredericks. But Mr. John, take us through your life. You anticipated when you were this important official in Guyana that we were coming up to leaving the Queen, leaving the status of Governor General and becoming a Republican. That was something that was going on. You could feel it in the air in Guyana around that time in the 70s.
We jumped to the 70s. First of all, I was at Queen's College at a time when a lot of brilliant young men were there. And by the time I got to the sixth form, there were people, Burnham was, the sixth form had 2 years. And there was, for Burnham in the second year, I was in the first year with people like Fred Wills and an amazingly bright man called Damodar Chintamarian Pandit. But in those days, for you to get a degree, you know, had to migrate and go overseas. But so many of them come back. Lala Latchpat Wright, Kenneth King, and a whole lot of very bright people. I wasn't that bright because, and even though I won the first writing literature prize they had offered. They had a magazine they introduced called the QC Lecture, and I won the first prize, but in literature. And but what happened then was everybody went off. I stayed on because I wasn't bright enough. And how should I put it? I went into the civil service. There, I discovered, or I was discovered by Rachel Jackson. I was a very suspect clerk, and I wasn't performing, and somebody complained about me.
That's what Mr. Jackson told you.
And therefore, they asked him to rescue me. Rachel Jackson was in the chief secretary's office. And that is how I came to be placed in the Columbia. They accepted me in 1953. But how shall I put it? In the meantime, I was working as a clerk in the Public Works Department. And you had people who were, why am I forgetting his name now, but he became an outstanding Guyanese writer, and so on. And I wrote my first piece, Death of a colleague. One of my colleagues was drowned while I was at the public service. And oh God.
That's a following is okay.
Okay. But, and then I was, it was, when we got independence, I think you would call it, and we had our first restructuring of the public service, and we had our own ministries. I was fortunate to be placed in the Ministry of Communication and Works with a very bright Prime Minister, permanent secretary named J. Allen Young. And what he did for me as a Class 2 clerk, anytime a minute went up to him, they call it minutes in those days, he would grade me BB+.
But let's talk about this.
I'm going to fill that out. Yeah. And the first time I got on, I decided to get a secretary to make a copy of that. And I will no longer get never get less than an A again. To skip and jump. I got, in the midst of those A's, A.J. Seymour, who was the head of the New GUYANA Information Services. He came in and sat at my Clark 2 desk and talked me into accepting a position of a government information officer. And I accepted and then got the approval of the permanent secretary. He offered me a salary that sounded more than the $80 a month I was getting. So I accepted that. And I went to GIS, where I worked with people like who worked for me in my program, Ken Cosby, who died recently, Wordsworth McAndrew, Wilbert Holder, who
all of those people you have interfaced with.
They were part of my program, Rural Notebook.
Mr. John, you would have met either casually or in depth, or you would have had ongoing friendship or slight friendship with all of the big names in Guyana, wouldn't you?
Not all.
I'm sorry. What was the first Mashomani like? What were you doing? Were you in Guyana when we had the first Mashomani?
Yeah.
Could you remember?
But it's interesting because despite all that intervention, I wasn't, how shall I put it? I wasn't a player. I wasn't a band man. I wasn't I might have been a listener, but I was a listener.
A reveler?
Of,
Maybe.
You participated in the first Mashomani on the street?
I really can't remember.
The second, the third? Were you ever part of the Mashomani?
No, that was my thing. Because my father, I must mention him, and Tim Smith, strangely enough, only took me in those days to Philharmonic orchestras and that type of concert.
Well, let's see what Craig has to ask.
All right. I'm following up from a question Freddie asked earlier about the atmosphere when we, rather than go to Republic, I wanted to start at Independence because to me that was the more memorable. Than, yeah. When this decision was made and the talk that Guyana will become independent, what do you remember about, first of all, your workplace? What was happening in the workplace? What were people saying? And outside of that, in social circles, how was it panning out?
Right.
And just before you answer, around that time, did you have the, were you able to meet or interview either Dr. Jagan or LFS?
I wasn't at that stage of that independence.
Okay.
I was retrieved at independence time.
You were retrieved?
Retrieved in 1953 by the Penumbrian Rashford Jackson, Aubrey Bishop, Frank Mongol, and those guys, 1953.
Okay.
And they took me into being a Penumbrian. It turned out to be an exceptional group of very...
But you should tell our viewers what is the Penumbrium Society? What are the Penumbriums and who are Penumbriums?
It was Frank Mongol and Aubrey Bishop.
Let me put this to
yeah.
The Penumbriums 1953-2023. Summary of the achievement and success of the Penumbrians. Who or what are the Penumbrians?
Aubrey Bishop and Frank Mongol were very close friends.
Aubrey Bishop, that's the
former chancellor.
Became chancellor.
Who
Okay.
became chancellor. And Frank Mongol, they were buddies. And they boast of being on the CO one night and having this dream of a moon that struck them. The moon was in the Umbra. And when they decided to call their schoolmates at Queens, a whole range of people, as mentioned in the book, and they decided to call themselves the Penumbrians. I was invited to join them about a year after, and because most of the guys were from Queens College, and there were others after that. But in all, it turned out to be 6 to 7 of us. Mostly migrated, but some of us stayed on. What was interesting, we recognized the turbulence was beginning to happen at that time. But we not so much politicians, but trying to make an identification for how we can grow Guyana, being the only English-speaking country in Latin America, as a consequence of which our motto was Amistad, Fraternidad y Honor, friendship, brotherhood, and honor. And we will bring people from the Caribbean, writers and to speak to us. We included the people we thought we could access that were prominent in Guyana. But we never got into politics as such. It's interesting because the first person to speak at our first dinner was Frida Tramfel. And I've always reflected, despite the Jurgens and the Burnhams, the Frederickks never invited them to any connection. We brought other West Indians from different parts of the Caribbean. It wasn't Caribbean then, it was West Indies, but never the local politicians. It turned out, however, that as things grew, one of the members, and he was an early member, was Desmond Hoy. But interestingly enough, Desmond Hoy was known to be a very funny person. He made you laugh. No politician has said anything to the public and made them laugh since Desmond Hoy. And because he didn't have a high opinion of himself. And when he came back as a lawyer, for some reason, Fox Burnham picked on him. And he tells the story that Burnham had a habit of, wherever he was visiting and traveling, he would take a group of people to see him off at least. And this time, Desmond tells the story, Burnham invited him to come along with him to the airport. And he went, very innocently. And when Burnham came out of the car and invited him up to the steps and turned him, and Burnham said to him, when I come back, I'm going to make you minister of so on. And he rushed back to town to look for us and say how he panicked because he had no sense of being a politician at that stage.
When we moved into independence, you held a very important portfolio in the sugar industry. Did you see?
No, I went into the sugar industry in 1958.
No, but at independence you were in the sugar industry, 1966.
Yeah.
Did you see any changes in the white personnel after we became independent?
Oh, a lot. By that time, Jock Campbell and his team, Jock Campbell was quite socialist. And incidentally, he had a lot of empathy for Cheddar Jagan. I'll tell you about that. But by that time, we had replaced a lot of the white people in the sugar industry. Because the cadetships were going fast and furiously. Alan Luck and I were the first two. There were two before us, but they didn't stay on. Stanley Moore and...
That's the lawyer who became a minister, Stanley Moore?
Stanley Moore migrated. Yeah.
He died a few years ago.
Yeah.
2 years ago.
But
there wasn't a Stanley Moore who became a judge or something like that?
That's the same Stanley Moore.
Same Stanley.
Yeah.
But he migrated. He didn't stay long in the sugar. But so there was a time when you had 6, 7, 8 cadets, people studied, everybody was sent overseas to university. Because Bookers at that time not only had sugar in the rest of the Caribbean, it had in Africa, it had in Nigeria, too. And
So the white attitude, the attitude of the white people, 1967, because we got independence May, you begin to see a change in their attitude, or they became more hostile?
No, there was no question of hostility. They accepted the Booker philosophy, Jock Campbell's philosophy, but they had disappeared quite a lot by that time. They were still in the head office, because I went into the head office in 1964, was it, as assistant to the director of social policy, a man called Roy Close, a retired Lieutenant Colonel Roy Close, director of social policy. And he was responsible for all the things like moving the community centers, moving girls' clubs. They didn't think he was sensitive enough, so they brought me to be his assistant. At the same time, we had Lakshmi Narayan running industrial relations and Harry Davis running personnel. And they had a problem with Roy Close, because any submission you did, you still had to send it to Booker London for them to approve of he used to, they had to send it through him, and they discovered that what he did was type it over and sign his name, and they never got it in. So, what's his name? Jock Campbell came down and removed him and left me stuck with all this responsibility. And eventually Harold Davis, who had been promoted, I took over.
I want to show our viewers this little booklet here. I want to read it, and I'm going to show it to the screen. Cooperative Republic of Guyana, Some Presidential Relationships, 1961-2020, by Earl John, published in 2024. Now, in this booklet here, there's some things about your life that if we didn't have this interview, and people do not have access to this, they wouldn't know that Earl John left GUYSUCO because you refused the request by the head of the government, Forbes Burnham. You want to talk about that? And you said in this thing here, fortunately when you resigned because of the little disagreement with Burnham, CARICOM was waiting there for you. Could you recall, why did you, what did you say to Burnham?
Well, first of all, Burnham knew me from Queens, and we developed a relationship as adults that we used to meet at the Woodbine Hotel and have drinks. Not just the two of us, but other people. Sometimes in the late hours of the morning, and so we were pals, so to speak. And but interestingly enough, we never discussed politics. I think they recognized that whoever did that I was an independent, and therefore you couldn't shape me or reshape me. And therefore we talk about poetry, about literature and stuff like that. It turned out that when he in fact became president, Prime Minister first, and but when we were nationalized, he had a habit. Well, he was very fond of Harold Davis and highly respected Harold Davis, and Harold Davis deserved being appointed chairman of Booker Sugar Estates, what we call GUYSUCO. Few people, incidentally, know that I created the thing, the GUYSUCO.
Yes, yes, you said that in your book.
Yeah.
GUY,
Yeah.
capital G, S, capital S, U, capital SCO,
Yeah.
GUYSUCO.
Yeah.
I want to read it here. Accordingly, I tendered my resignation. The next day, taking into account the necessary notice to be given. My resignation was understandably accepted by the chairman. President Burnham let his dissatisfaction be publicly known that I lost several mutual friends who were also disenchanted with me. But as it turned out, the Secretary General of CARICOM made me an offer I could not refuse. So, if we didn't have that disagreement with you and Burnham, you probably would have never left the sugar industry.
That's a possibility, but life is like that because I did other things. This is not the only sugar industry I worked with, because Booker's had sent me to St. Kitts Nevis to restore the sugar industry there that was being taken over there by the Prime Minister then, Bradshaw. And I had to spend about 8 months there putting them together again. So when Booker Tate came back and asked me back from CARICOM, and I remember the guys, we were sitting at the swimming pool at the hotel tower, and morning this one from Booker Tate said to me, he said, you know, I've been long waiting to meet you for the work you did in putting the St. Kitts sugar industry together again and make it viable.
You're a real Caribbean man, Mr. John.
Well, the
You
record...
worked at CARICOM, helped to put in place the Human Resource Department of CARICOM.
Well,
you resuscitated the St. Kitts sugar industry.
Well,
you spent 20 years in Guyana sugar industry.
Well, I did more than that because the records would show that I established the Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute while I was in Trinidad. I established SEHI. I established what's the one that, oh gosh, I shouldn't forget it, but that is when it's an organization, SETP, Caribbean Education and Development, Economic Development Institute. Those are the people who had started out certifying Caribbean products that were being sold.
Leonard?
All right, so I don't know how much of MASH you take in these days, probably on TV or whatever.
No.
You don't take?
No,
even as a...
No.
Okay, so you don't have any...
No. I don't even read my own poems.
Oh!
I couldn't read any of my...
Mr. John, you're doing Guyana a disservice by not publicizing your poems. Mr. John writes beautiful poetry. This is his latest book, Songs of Our Souls by John. And I can tell you, for someone who reads poetry, I do like Songs of Our Soul. I asked Mr. John in this book which of the two poems he likes the best. And I have them here, and I don't know if Leonard wants to read one, and I will read one. Do you want to read one? One is for Andaya.
You know who Andaya is?
Yes,
of course.
Yes.
He has a long history of political activism.
Yeah.
Politics is in his blood.
Okay.
You want to read for Andaya?
What he's suggesting, I don't have blood. That's why.
maybe that's why you didn't come close to politics.
You gotta let your
and
decibels
politicians.
ways, right?
All right. Early morning, awake, early morning, June 08. Somehow, with a sense of anticipation, indeed exhilaration, a day of celebration of life, so honored. The heavy morning clouds keep lifting, their darkness brightened, giving hope for a brilliant day. Just later, true to expectation, the beflowered convention hall in the place of Promenade Gardens spoke to the welcome of women first, then male adherents to Andaye. Tributes by brilliant women from several countries, Asha, Margaret, Roberta, and Guyana, Joy, Halima, Denise, Eulalie, committed to sustaining the productive activism represented in Andaye. Is there more?
Yes, let me read the one for his wife. He wrote for his wife. His departed, beloved wife.
That's not a lot of this.
It's called First to Last for Sicily, Mr. John's departed wife. I will read. He said this is the second poem. Well, there's no order preference, the one for Andaye and the one for his life. In this anthology, Songs of Our Souls, this is the poem for his wife. I will now read it.
No,
Green dress, busting. Yes,
sorry, I wrote that the day she died.
You wrote this the day she died. All right. I guess you still miss her. I guess you still miss her whenever you pick up this book. Poem for Mr. John's departed wife. First to last. Green dress busting at the top. Slim legs matter little when radiated by brilliant, energetic mind, and all lasting the era of our life. Singing, dancing, graceful, zestful youth, bountiful promise, dauntless future. Chemistry of sensibilities, interweave of intellect, naivety, curiosity, rush towards discovery of self and other. Meshing on meshing, matching on matching, doubling, singing, once, twice. Fresh beginnings, different paths crossing, meeting, reconciling, friendship steadied, solidified, sustained, the whole era of our life. Spirit survives, faith remains, life resumes to celebrate the era of our life. And it says at the bottom here, note, written the morning of July 6, 2001. Good book of poetry, Songs of Our Souls. If you have an extra copy, this young man could do with it. But you want to say something about your book of poetry? You should speak to Mr. Ian MacDonald and let this thing be
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Ian MacDonald, because when we shared the head office, he was then company secretary. Ian MacDonald came, brought him out from Trinidad, and he was company secretary at Booker's at the time. And then one day he said to me, he says, John, he says, are you related to? I said, John. I said, that's my father. He says, you know, he has a poem in the first anthology of Guyanese poetry published.
Your father?
And he got me a copy of it later on. It was Song of My Soul.
Oh, that's what
his poem is.
Operator signal that our time is coming. This young man says he likes politics. He sees the future of himself in politics. What advice you have to give him as someone who has attained the age of 94 and seen it all? Knew Burnham, knew Dragon, knew Sheila Tramfall, knew all the big ones, the colonial big ones. The man who discovered one of the greatest left-handed batsmen in world test cricket. What do you advise you have to say to him?
Well, first
if you're going to go into politics, what qualities you should have?
It's more than that. First of all, you have to
You listening?
have to have the history that is affecting us now. And you have to be able to make a distinction of the argumentation. At this point in time, I have a problem about, what is the word I'm looking for? But people being too individualistic, too much of themselves. And I have a problem with communication in which people talk down. They don't talk with. And then they assume they know. And I am terrified by the fact they don't know that they don't know. If you see the amount of work I'm doing on analyzing the 2025 budget, I've been doing those budget analysis.
The operator signal, we have to go. I want to ask you a few things, our views. Which part of your life in the period, you're 94, which part of that 94 time frame you had what you would say was the most enjoyable part of your life? When you were 30, when you were 50, when you were 70?
I would prefer you ask what is the most productive part of my life. And the most productive part is the consultancy that I've done and what I've produced.
And you were in your 60s then?
The first consultancy, I was invited by a Canadian company to help them to create GRA.
GRA? Guyana Revenue Authority?
Yes.
You were one of the brains behind that?
GRA was the
Customs and Excise.
I know, yeah, it was fragmented. They brought
Customs and Excise,
the revenue and licensing
and income tax. I was the one who when they did the construction, I wrote 200 new job descriptions.
Look at that, you know, this interview has contextualized the man or John, the operator signal, we gotta go. Mr. John, what kind of music in your earlier days you like? What kind of, you like reggae, soul, classical?
My father indulged me in classical music.
Okay.
They have philharmonic orchestras in those days.
But we got to go. I did not use the term. You used it. Sweet man. I didn't use it. Did you ever have episodic moments of sweet manism in your life?
Not for the record.
No, not for the record. Mr. John, thanks for talking to us, and I hope this young man heed your advice.
No, but you could come and talk to me.
Surely.
You were watching an interview with one of Guyana's longest serving servant. He's age 94 and he's been there, seen it, and have done that. He was very, very important to the sugar industry, very important to CARICOM, and we would like you to pay careful attention to this interview and some of the contributions he has made in the establishment of the GRA. Our guest was Mr. Earl John, and we did this interview at his home in Sachi Bazaar in Prashad Nagar. His veranda overlooks the headquarters of the People's National Congress. Thanks for being with us. Enjoy Mashumani. Let down your hair because you don't know what happens tomorrow. We will see you in our next interview on Wednesday. Take care. On behalf of Mr. John and then our Craig, bye-bye. Happy Mashumani.